"Log offline and get out," Keith barked, his face flushed red as he stood over my desk. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. My fingers were still hovering over the keyboard, the backup script for Hartman Industries' entire host matrix running smoothly in the terminal window. 23 months of work, an $8 million contract, their platform launch in less than an hour, and my supervisor just told me to leave. So I did exactly what he ordered. I logged offline. The confirmation dialog appeared on my screen, terminate active processes. My cursor moved to yes. One click, and the backup script dissolved into digital nothingness. I grabbed my badge, my coffee mug, and walked toward the elevator, leaving Keith standing there with that satisfied smirk on his face, completely unaware of what compliance with his order actually meant. Stories like these don't happen in a vacuum. They're built from months of small injustices, overlooked contributions, and the breaking point where following orders becomes the perfect form of resistance. Welcome to Payback Office Channel, where we explore the moments when doing exactly what you're told becomes the most powerful response of all. If stories about workplace justice resonate with you, hitting that subscribe button helps us build this community. We're working toward 8,000 subscribers who believe that sometimes the best way to stand up is to simply follow the rules. My name is Diana Walsh, and 6 months ago, I was the senior DevOps engineer at Cascade Technologies, a mid-sized tech firm in Portland that specialized in infrastructure management for high-growth startups. I grew up in a household where my mother cleaned office buildings at night while studying for her nursing degree. She taught me that understanding someone's struggle doesn't require sharing their circumstances. It requires choosing empathy. The morning of April 15th started like any other Wednesday. I arrived at Cascade's downtown office at 6:47 a.m., earlier than usual because Hartman Industries' public launch was scheduled for 2 p.m. Their platform, a revolutionary supply chain optimization tool, represented the biggest client deployment in Cascade's history. For nearly 2 years, I'd been the lead engineer on their infrastructure, building redundancy systems, optimizing their database architecture, and creating failsafes that could handle 10 times their projected traffic. The backup script I'd written wasn't just code, it was an insurance policy. Every 6 hours, it ran a complete mirror of Hartman's repository, capturing every configuration file, every environment variable, every dependency. If something went catastrophically wrong, we could restore their entire system in under 12 minutes. The script was sophisticated enough that it required manual termination. I'd built it that way specifically to prevent accidental shutdowns. Keith Brennan became my supervisor 4 months earlier, brought in as Director of Engineering Operations by our CEO, Thomas Calloway. Keith came from a traditional corporate background, all hierarchy and optics, very little substance. He had a master's degree in business administration and approximately 6 months of actual technical experience from an internship he'd done a decade ago. Our first clash happened in his second week. I'd submitted a detailed proposal for upgrading our monitoring systems. 3 days later, Keith presented his infrastructure improvement plan to the executive team, my proposal, word for word, with his name on it. When I confronted him privately, he leaned back in his chair with that condescending smile. "Diana, you're talented technically, but you don't understand corporate dynamics. Ideas need the right messenger." I didn't push back, not then. I documented everything and kept working. The second incident came 6 weeks later. During a rare moment when I left at 6 p.m. to attend my nephew's birthday dinner, Keith sent a company-wide email questioning commitment levels and dedication to client success. The email didn't name me specifically, but the timing made his target clear. By early April, 3 people had left our department. Exit interviews mentioned management concerns, but nothing changed. Keith had positioned himself as indispensable to Thomas Calloway, always taking credit when projects succeeded and redirecting blame when they didn't. The morning of the 15th, I was running final checks on Hartman's deployment. At 11:33 a.m., I noticed something odd in the monitoring dashboard. One of the load balancers was showing intermittent latency spikes. I ran diagnostics and discovered that someone had modified the caching configuration. The change was recent, time-stamped at 9:47 a.m. that morning. I checked the change log. The modification came from Keith's credentials. I walked to his office. He was on a personal call, laughing about golf plans. I waited at his door. He saw me, held up one finger in a wait gesture, and continued his conversation for another 4 minutes. Finally, he hung up. "What is it, Diana? I'm busy." "There's a configuration change on the Hartman load balancers from your account this morning. It's going to cause scaling issues during launch. Did you modify the caching parameters?" His expression shifted through confusion to something defensive. I was implementing an optimization. "Keith, that change reduces cache efficiency by about 30%. When traffic hits during launch, response times are going to crater." He stood up, his voice hardening. "Are you questioning my technical judgment?" "I'm trying to understand the rationale so we can revert it before it becomes a problem. The launch is in 2.5 hours. The rationale is that I have 15 years of industry experience and a strategic perspective you haven't developed yet. The configuration stays." "Keith, with respect, this will cause measurable performance degradation. I can show you the projections." "What you can show me is some appreciation for leadership decisions. The change stays. Focus on your assigned tasks." I stood there for a moment, calculating whether to escalate this to Thomas Calloway directly. But Keith had the CEO's ear, and I had a history of conflict with my supervisor. "Understood," I said. "I'll document the current configuration and monitor performance closely during launch." I returned to my desk and did exactly what I said, documented everything, including screenshots of Keith's modification, my warning, and his refusal to revert the change. Then I built a workaround. I couldn't change the load balancer configuration without directly contradicting Keith, but I could adjust other parameters to partially compensate. At 12:15 p.m., Keith sent a Slack message to the entire engineering team. "Final preparations for Hartman launch looking excellent. Proud of this team's execution." I kept working, running simulations, stress testing the workarounds. The backup script hummed along in the background. At 12:50 p.m., I grabbed a protein bar from my desk drawer, too focused to break for lunch. That's when Keith appeared at my desk again. His face was flushed, and there was something manic in his eyes. "I need you to do something," he said, his voice low. I looked up. "What do you need?" "Access the admin panel and clear the change logs from this morning. Just the ones between 9:30 and 10 a.m. The request hit me like cold water. "Clear the change logs? Keith, those are audit records. We can't delete audit trails." "I'm not asking you to delete them permanently. Just clear them from the client-facing dashboard. Mitchell Hartman's technical team has access to that view, and I don't want them questioning configuration changes right before launch. If his team has questions, we can explain the rationale." "Diana, I'm not debating this with you. Clear the logs. That's a direct instruction from your supervisor." I felt the weight of the moment. Keith had realized his change was problematic and wanted to hide the evidence. "I'm not comfortable falsifying audit records," I said quietly. Keith's expression went cold. "Comfortable? Since when do I need you to be comfortable with assignments?" "Maintaining accurate audit trails is part of my job. Actually, it's a compliance requirement in our contract with Hartman. Section 7.3 specifies that all infrastructure changes must be logged and preserved." "Don't lecture me about contracts. Clear the logs." "Keith, I can't." "You can and you will, or we're going to have a very different conversation about your future here." Around the office, other engineers were deliberately not looking in our direction, but I could feel the attention. "Are you instructing me to violate our contractual audit requirements?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Keith's jaw clenched. "I'm instructing you to follow a reasonable directive from your supervisor. If you're refusing, say so clearly." "I'm not refusing. I'm asking you to put the instruction in writing so I have documentation for compliance purposes." His face went red. "Everything doesn't need to be documented, Diana. This is a simple task that should take you 30 seconds. The fact that you're turning it into a political issue tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. Client audit integrity isn't political. Enough, he cut me off with a slashing hand gesture. I've had it with your attitude. Every single conversation with you turns into an argument. Every decision gets questioned. I gave you a simple instruction, and instead of doing your job, you're lecturing me about compliance like I'm some kind of amateur. That's not. I said enough, you know what, log offline and get out. The words were loud enough that the entire floor heard them. Conversation stopped. Excuse me, I said. You heard me. Log offline. Get out. Go home. I'm tired of dealing with your insubordination today. We'll discuss your employment status tomorrow, but right now, I want you out of this office. My heart was pounding, but my mind went very calm. Just to be clear, I said, you're instructing me to log out of all systems and leave the premises. That's exactly what I'm instructing, right now. Understood. I turned to my keyboard, opened the terminal. The backup scripts process ID was right there, along with the active sessions for monitoring dashboards, deployment tools, communication channels. The system prompted me, you have 7 active processes, terminate all. My cursor hovered over the confirmation. Keith wanted me logged offline, so I'd log offline. I clicked yes. The script terminated. The backup process stopped mid-cycle. The monitoring dashboards went dark. Every active connection I had to Hartman's infrastructure severed simultaneously. I stood up, grabbed my badge and my coffee mug. Logged offline as instructed, I said. Keith was already turning away, dismissing me. Good, be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow for a formal review. I walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw Stephanie staring at me with wide eyes. She'd worked with me long enough to know what systems I'd just shut down. Her expression was somewhere between horror and awe. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking. Not from fear, from the pure adrenaline of having just followed orders with absolute precision. I sat in my car for a long moment, breathing slowly. My phone was in my pocket. I knew what was about to happen. The only question was timing. Keith had ordered me to leave. I'd logged out of everything, exactly as instructed. He had no idea that everything included the backup script that was the only safety net between Hartman Industries and potential catastrophe. Without it, there was no real-time backup of their repository. If anything went wrong with the launch, recovery time would stretch from 12 minutes to potentially hours or even days. I drove home. My apartment was 23 minutes from the office. I changed out of my work clothes, made a cup of tea, and sat on my couch with my phone on the coffee table. The launch was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 1:47 my phone buzzed. Stephanie. Deanna, oh my God, did you shut down the backup script? Keith told me to log offline and get out, so I logged offline. There was a pause. He doesn't know, does he? Probably not. Should I tell someone? Should I restart it? Stephanie, I was ordered to leave the premises. I can't access any systems remotely without violating that direct instruction. As for you, I'd be very careful about touching anything without explicit authorization. Document everything you do and why. This is going to be bad, isn't it? That depends on whether the launch goes smoothly. At 2:11 p.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. Diana Walsh. Diana, it's Jason, from the office. I'm calling from the conference room. You need to know what's happening. I'm listening. The launch happened at 2. Everything seemed fine initially. Then at 2:07, traffic started ramping faster than projected. At 2:09, response times started degrading. By 2:10, we were seeing serious latency. Keith tried to scale up server capacity, but it's not helping because the problem is the caching configuration. The configuration Keith had changed. How bad? Pages are taking 12 to 15 seconds to load. For a platform that's supposed to optimize supply chain efficiency in real time, that's catastrophic. Mitchell Hartman's team is seeing the same thing we are. I closed my eyes. What about rolling back the configuration change? Keith tried. But when he went to check the change logs to see what parameters to revert, he realized the backup script also maintains a versioned history of configuration states. Without it running, there's no easy way to identify exactly what was changed and when. Where's Thomas Calloway? He was at some executive retreat, but he's on his way back now. Keith is the senior person managing this crisis, and he's in way over his head. He's issuing contradictory instructions, and now everyone's too scared to do anything without his explicit approval. Can you restore the system to a known good state? We're trying, but without the backup script's version snapshots, it's taking time we don't have. And Keith told us you just left for personal reasons. He didn't mention that he ordered you out. Anger flared in my chest. He's lying about what happened. Yeah, most of us figured that out. Stephanie told people what she saw, but officially, the story is that you left voluntarily. Jason, I was given a direct order to log offline and leave the building. I have witnesses. I believe you, but you should know that Keith is already setting up a narrative where this crisis is somehow your fault. The documentation is comprehensive. It's in the shared drive folder labeled Hartman Infrastructure Docs. Good to know. I should go. Things are getting worse. I just thought you should hear this from someone who was actually in the room. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen, feeling the weight of decisions already made. I opened my laptop and wrote out a detailed timeline, from Keith's initial configuration change through the audit log conversation to his order that I leave. I included specific quotes, times, and witness names. I attached screenshots of Keith's modification and my warning messages. I saved everything in 3 different locations. Then I waited. At 2:29 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Diana, this is Lewis from engineering. You don't know me well, but I'm watching Keith completely lose it. He just tried to manually edit a production database table and nearly corrupted the entire user authentication system. Jason stopped him at the last second. Thought you should know. My stomach dropped. Keith was making it worse. At 2:34 p.m., another text from Lewis. He's yelling at Stephanie now, demanding to know why she can't just restart Diana's backup thing. She's trying to explain that it requires your credentials and oversight protocols, but he's not listening. I could picture it perfectly. Keith, drowning in a crisis he'd created, lashing out at anyone nearby. At 2:41 p.m., Stephanie called. I could hear chaos in the background, multiple voices, someone shouting. Diana, I know you can't help, but you need to know what's happening here. Keith just ordered Jason to roll back the entire deployment to yesterday's build. Jason's refusing because that would erase all of Hartman's configuration and data from the last 24 hours. Keith threatened to fire him on the spot. Where's the rest of the team? Trying to stay out of the line of fire. Half the engineers have physically left their desks and are hiding in the break room. It's complete chaos. Through the phone, I heard a crash, something hitting the floor. What was that? Keith just threw his coffee mug at the wall. Diana, I've never seen anyone this out of control. He knows he's drowning, and he's taking everyone down with him. At 2:47 p.m., Stephanie texted. Mitchell Hartman just arrived at the office. He's in the lobby with Thomas Calloway. CEO's face is red. My stomach dropped. At 2:52 p.m., another text from Stephanie. Keith just ran out of his office, literally ran to the conference room. His shirt has sweat stains. Thomas and Mitchell went in there with him. Door slammed. At 2:55 p.m., Lewis texted. We can all hear Mitchell Hartman shouting. He just said something about supplier contracts worth $40 million sitting in limbo because your platform doesn't work. This is so bad. At 2:58 p.m., someone just said $8 million loud enough that the whole floor heard it. At 3:02 p.m., my phone rang. Thomas Calloway. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Diana Walsh. Diana, it's Thomas. I need you to tell me exactly what happened today and why you're not in the office. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the stress underneath. At approximately 12:50 p.m., Keith Brennan asked me to falsify audit records by deleting change logs that showed a configuration modification he'd made to Hartman's load balancers. I declined and cited our contractual obligation to maintain accurate audit trails. Keith became angry and gave me a direct order to log offline and leave the premises. I complied with his instruction. I logged out of all systems and left the building at approximately 12:58 p.m. I have witnesses. Silence on the other end. Then, he asked you to falsify audit records. Yes, I have documentation of the configuration change and my prior warnings that it would cause performance problems during scale-up. And the backup script that's apparently critical to rapid recovery, why isn't it running? Keith ordered me to log offline. The backup script runs under my credentials and requires manual oversight. When I logged offline as instructed, all my active processes terminated, including that script. You're telling me that Keith Brennan ordered you to leave the building 1 hour before our most important launch of the year, and in doing so, shut down the primary recovery system. That's correct, though I don't believe Keith understood the technical implications of his order. But you understood the implications. Yes. And you logged offline anyway. Keith gave me a direct order in front of multiple witnesses to log offline and leave the premises immediately. Refusing would have been insubordination. I complied exactly with his instruction. Another long pause. Diana, I need you to come back to the office right now. We have a crisis, and you're the only person who fully understands these systems. Am I still employed by Cascade Technologies? What? Yes, of course. Because Keith indicated that my employment status would be reviewed tomorrow morning. I want to be clear about my status before I return. Your employment is not in question. I need you here now to help fix this situation. I'll need Keith's explicit authorization to access the systems, given that he ordered me off them. I heard muffled conversation, Thomas covering the phone. When he came back, his voice was formal. Diana, this is Thomas Calloway, CEO of Cascade Technologies. I am officially authorizing you to return to the office and take any actions necessary to restore Hartman Industries' platform to full functionality. You will have complete access to all systems and resources. Keith Brennan will not interfere with your work. Do you understand? Yes, I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive back downtown felt surreal. I parked in the garage and took the elevator up. The receptionist gave me a complicated look. They're waiting for you in the war room, she said quietly. And Diana, good luck. I walked through the office. Engineers at their desks tracked my movement with quick glances. Several gave subtle nods of support. Stephanie caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank God." The conference room door was closed. Through the glass, I could see the tension inside. I knocked once and entered. Thomas Calloway sat at the head of the table, his tie loosened and his expression carved from stone. Mitchell Hartman was to his right, mid-50s, silver hair, and controlled anger that comes from watching your biggest moment collapse. Keith stood near the window, his face pale and shining with sweat, his previously crisp white shirt wrinkled and stained. Two people from Hartman's technical team sat with laptops open, their expressions grim. Thomas looked up. Diana, thank you for coming back. Of course. I set my laptop on the table. What's the current status? Mitchell Hartman spoke, and his voice made the room feel 10 degrees colder. Current status is that my platform has been publicly accessible for 97 minutes, and for 73 of those minutes, it's been essentially unusable. We've had 4 major partners call asking if we're experiencing technical difficulties. My CTO has been fielding panicked messages from our early adopters. 3 supplier contracts worth a combined $42 million are sitting in limbo because the companies can't access our platform to complete their integrations. And I've been sitting here trying to understand how a company I've paid $8 million managed to catastrophically fail at the exact moment we went public. His voice was level, but the fury underneath was unmistakable. Keith started to speak, his voice shaky. Mitchell, I want to assure you that we're doing everything. Keith, you're done talking. Mitchell didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on me. Diana, can you fix this? I pulled up my laptop and quickly scanned the infrastructure dashboard. The numbers were worse than Jason had described. Response times averaging 16 seconds now. Database CPU at 94%. Error rates climbing. I need access to the admin console, and approximately 15 minutes without interruption. You have it, Thomas said immediately. I sat down and opened my laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard. The room went silent except for the clicking of keys. I pulled up the configuration files Keith had modified. Here's the primary problem, I said, turning my screen so Mitchell could see. The cache timeout was changed from 300 seconds to 30 seconds. It's forcing constant refreshes instead of serving cached content. Every request is hitting the database directly. One of Hartman's technical people leaned forward, his eyes widening. That's why our database CPU is maxed out. We couldn't figure out why the caching layer wasn't helping. We thought we had a query optimization problem. I reverted the change. No, your queries are fine. The caching layer was just disabled by this configuration change. 30 seconds later, response times began dropping. 11 seconds, 9 seconds, 7 seconds. Keith moved from the window, suddenly animated. Wait, Diana, you should coordinate those changes with the team before. Keith, sit down and be quiet. Thomas's voice was ice. Keith froze mid-step, his mouth still open, then slowly sank into a chair. I pulled up the workaround configurations I'd implemented earlier. They were designed to compensate for Keith's bad caching change, but now that the cache was fixed, they were creating drag. I removed them one by one, watching the metrics respond in real time. 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. Response times are improving significantly, one of Hartman's people said, refreshing his dashboard. We're getting back to normal ranges. I restarted the backup script, watching it initialize and begin its integrity checks. Then I ran verification protocols across the entire system. 2 configuration backup files showed corruption from the mid-cycle termination, non-critical, but they needed attention. I flagged them and initiated manual repairs. As the system stabilized, I noticed something else in the logs. Another configuration change from Keith's credentials, timestamped during the crisis. I opened it. My blood went cold. Thomas, I said quietly, there's something else you need to see. I turned my screen toward him. At 2:33 p.m., during the crisis, someone using Keith's credentials attempted to modify the audit log retention policy. It looks like an attempt to reduce the retention period from 90 days to 7 days. Mitchell Hartman stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. He tried to destroy the audit trail during the crisis. The change didn't complete successfully. Our compliance safeguards prevented it. But yes, the attempt was made. Keith's face went from pale to gray. I was just trying to free up storage space. Keith, Thomas's voice could have cut glass. Stop talking. I turned back to my systems, running the final diagnostics. 12 minutes after I'd sat down, response times stabilized at 1.8 seconds. I ran a full diagnostic suite across every component. Load balancers, green. Database clusters, green. API endpoints, green. Caching layer, green. Backup systems, operational. Platform is stable, I announced. Response times are normal, all systems showing green. The backup script is running again with full integrity checks enabled. We're operational. Mitchell Hartman stared at his laptop screen, watching his platform's metrics return to normal. One of his technical team members was rapidly typing on his laptop. Confirmed, the tech said. We're back to normal performance across all endpoints. Transaction processing is flowing. The 3 supplier integrations that were stuck are completing now. Mitchell turned to Keith. What did you say earlier? That the problem was inadequate system documentation and single points of failure in the architecture. Keith's face went from pale to red. I was trying to identify root causes in a high-pressure situation. The root cause, Mitchell said, his voice cutting, is that you made a change you didn't understand, tried to cover it up by asking someone to falsify audit records, fired the one person who could fix your mess, then attempted to destroy evidence during the crisis. Is that an accurate summary, Diana? That's accurate, I said. Thomas leaned forward. Diana, can you give us a written summary of today's events? Everything from the initial configuration, change through the recovery just now. I already have most of it documented. I can have a complete report to you within the hour. Good, thank you. You can return to your desk. We'll talk later. As I stood to leave, Keith finally found his voice. Thomas, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what happened at lunch. Deanna and I had a disagreement about protocol, and I may have been unclear about my instructions. Keith, Thomas didn't raise his voice, but the single word stopped Keith cold. There were multiple witnesses to your order that Diana leave immediately. There are timestamps showing exactly when her systems went offline. There's documentation of you attempting to hide your configuration changes. You tried to destroy audit logs during a client crisis. And there's an $8 million client relationship that almost collapsed because of your decisions. We're done here. Mitchell Hartman stood. Thomas, I'm going to need a formal incident report, a comprehensive review of what happened, and a very detailed conversation about how Cascade plans to prevent this from ever happening again. You'll have all of that, Thomas said. Mitchell, I can't apologize enough. I don't want apologies. I want competence. I want to know that the person managing my infrastructure actually understands the systems they're responsible for. He looked directly at me. Diana, would you be willing to attend a meeting tomorrow with my technical team? I want you to walk us through exactly what happened and what safeguards you've built into our infrastructure. Of course, I said. Good, because after watching you fix in 12 minutes what they couldn't fix in over an hour, I have questions about who should actually be managing this relationship. I left the conference room. The hallway felt 20 degrees cooler. I walked back through the office. The energy had completely changed. Engineers were looking at their screens with visible relief. Stephanie intercepted me halfway to my desk. You're incredible, 12 minutes. Keith spent an hour making it worse, and you fixed it in 12 minutes. Jason appeared next to her. The whole floor watched the metrics come back online. It was like watching a miracle. Lewis joined them. I've never seen anyone shut down that completely and that fast. Keith looked like he was going to throw up. I spent the next 45 minutes writing my report. I kept it factual, chronological, and unemotional. Every claim was supported by timestamps, screenshots, or witness accounts. I documented Keith's initial configuration change, my warning about the performance impact, his refusal to revert it, the conversation about audit logs, his order that I leave, my compliance, the resulting system failures, his attempted destruction of audit trails during the crisis, and the recovery process. I attached technical appendices showing the specific configuration changes and their predictable effects on system performance. I included my workaround implementations with timestamps showing I'd built them before being ordered out. I added the security logs showing Keith's attempt to modify audit retention policies during the crisis. I made it impossible for anyone reading the report to misunderstand the chain of causation. At 4:23 p.m., I sent the report to Thomas with a CC to HR and, at Mitchell Hartman's request, to his CTO. At 4:31 p.m., Keith walked out of the conference room. He didn't look at anyone, didn't stop at his office. He went straight to the elevator and left the building. He was carrying his briefcase and laptop bag and a cardboard box that security had apparently given him. His security badge was already deactivated. I saw him try to swipe it at the elevator and get denied, forcing him to wait for someone else to open the door. He never came back. At 5:47 p.m., Thomas emerged and walked directly to my desk. Deanna, a word in my office. I followed him. He closed the door and gestured to a chair. First, I want to apologize. Keith Brennan was my hire. I failed to recognize that he was fundamentally unsuited for the role. That failure put you in an impossible position and nearly destroyed our most important client relationship. That's on me. I nodded, saying nothing. Second, Keith's employment with Cascade ended about 10 minutes ago. He will not be returning to this office. Understood. Third, I want to know if you want his job, Director of Engineering Operations. You've been functioning at that level already. You have the technical expertise Keith lacked, and you've demonstrated better judgment under pressure than most executives I've worked with. The role is yours if you want it. I considered, can I think about it? Of course, take a few days. But Diana, whatever you decide about the title, I need to know you're staying with Cascade. After today, you could justifiably walk out and never come back. I'm asking you not to do that. I'm not planning to leave, but if I take a leadership role, I need autonomy to make decisions without political interference. I need support when I raise concerns. And I need a culture where technical expertise is respected, not undermined. You have my commitment on all of that. Today was a wake-up call about what happens when we don't have those things. We talked for another 15 minutes about reporting structure, team composition, and decision-making authority. By the time I left his office, the shape of something new was clear. I returned to my desk to find Stephanie, Jason, Lewis, and 3 other engineers waiting. Is it true, Stephanie asked, Keith's gone? As of about 30 minutes ago, yes. The relief was visible. Jason smiled. Good, he was a disaster. Are you taking his position? Thomas offered it. I'm thinking about it. You should take it, Stephanie said immediately. You'd actually know what you're doing, and you wouldn't throw people under the bus. Lewis nodded. We'd actually have a leader who understands the work. That would be revolutionary. By 6:30, the office was mostly empty. I did a final check of all systems, confirmed the backup script was running smoothly, and sent a status update to Thomas and Mitchell Hartman's CTO. Then I drove home, processing the fact that my entire professional situation had transformed in 6 hours. Over the following weeks, I accepted Thomas's offer and stepped into the director role. The transition was smoother than expected, largely because the engineering team was relieved to have leadership that understood the actual work. My first major decision was restructuring how we handled technical decisions. I implemented a policy requiring sign-off from the actual engineers doing the work before any infrastructure changes went live. No more executives making modifications they didn't understand. Stephanie was promoted to senior DevOps engineer with a substantial raise. Jason took on additional leadership responsibilities as lead infrastructure architect. Lewis became our primary security specialist. The department began functioning the way it should have all along. 3 weeks into the new role, we faced our first real test. It was a Tuesday morning when Jason rushed into my office. Diana, we've got a problem. The Morrison Group deployment is showing database connection errors. Their CEO is speaking at a conference in 2 hours and planned to demo the platform live. I pulled up the monitoring dashboard. Connection pool exhaustion. Classic scaling issue, but the timing was terrible. Get the team in the war room. 5 minutes. 6 engineers assembled quickly. I pulled up the architecture diagrams on the main screen. Here's the situation. Morrison's traffic spiked overnight. Looks like their marketing campaign performed better than projected. We're hitting connection limits. Jason, increase the pool size to 500 and monitor. Stephanie, check if we can spin up 2 additional database replicas for red traffic. Lewis, review their query patterns from the last 12 hours and identify anything we can optimize on the fly. No panic, no finger-pointing, just clear instructions to people I trusted. Jason made the connection pool adjustment. Pool increased, response times improving. Stephanie worked her console. Replicas spinning up, they'll be online in 90 seconds. Lewis scanned through query logs. Found it. They've got a dashboard widget making an unoptimized query every 3 seconds. I can add an index that'll speed this up by about 80%. Do it, I said. Within 8 minutes, Morrison's platform was stable. Response times were back to normal. The connection errors stopped. I called Morrison's CTO directly. Amanda, this is Diana Walsh from Cascade. We identified and resolved the database issues. Your platform is stable for the demo. We've also implemented optimizations that'll handle significantly higher traffic going forward. You're sure it's fixed? Amanda sounded stressed. Roger goes on stage in 90 minutes. I'm sure. We'll monitor throughout the demo. If anything changes, you'll know before your CEO does. The demo went perfectly. Roger Morrison showcased the platform to 300 potential clients without a single hiccup. The next day, Amanda sent a formal thank you email to Thomas, specifically praising the engineering team's rapid response and expertise. Thomas forwarded it to me with a note, "This is what good leadership looks like. Thank you." That incident set the tone. Over the next months, the department transformed. Engineers felt empowered to raise concerns. Technical decisions were made by technical people. Credit went to those who did the work. We had 0 major outages. Client satisfaction scores increased. 3 engineers who'd been considering leaving decided to stay. We hired 2 new senior engineers who specifically cited strong technical leadership as their reason for joining. In a quarterly all-hands meeting, Thomas publicly acknowledged the change. Our engineering operations have improved dramatically. Client feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. We've had 0 critical incidents in the last quarter, compared to 4 in the quarter before. That's a direct result of having the right leadership in place and empowering the people doing the work to make decisions. He didn't mention Keith by name, but everyone understood the implicit comparison. About 5 weeks after Keith's termination, I received a call from Mitchell Hartman himself. "Diana, I wanted to update you on something. You know those 3 supplier integrations that were stuck during the launch disaster?" "Yes." "All 3 completed successfully. But more than that, the companies were so impressed with how your team handled the crisis recovery that 2 of them have asked about using Cascade for their own infrastructure needs. I've referred them to Thomas. That's potentially another $3 million in business for Cascade, directly because of how you handled that situation." "I appreciate you letting me know, Mitchell." "There's something else. I'm planning to expand Hartman's platform into European markets next year. It's going to require significant infrastructure scaling. I want you personally overseeing that expansion. Not Cascade as a company, you specifically. I'm writing that into the contract." "I'd be honored." "You earned it. What you did that day, fixing a disaster you'd warned about, that someone else created, in 12 minutes flat, that's the kind of expertise I want on my team. Whatever Cascade is paying you, make sure it reflects your actual value." 6 months after the incident, I got an unexpected email from Keith. The subject line was apology. "Diana, I've spent the last 6 months in therapy and executive coaching, trying to understand what went wrong at Cascade. I've come to realize that I treated you terribly. I didn't respect your expertise. I tried to take credit for your work. I put my ego ahead of what was right for the company and the clients. When you challenged me on something I knew I was wrong about, I retaliated instead of listening. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm genuinely sorry. You deserved better. Keith." I read it 3 times. It seemed sincere. I thought about not responding, but ultimately decided acknowledgement was appropriate. "Keith, I appreciate you sending this. I hope your work on yourself is productive and that your next leadership role benefits from what you've learned. Best wishes, Diana." I didn't tell him where I was working or what I was doing. That felt like appropriate boundaries. One afternoon, Stephanie stopped by my office. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That day with Keith, when he ordered you out, did you know what would happen when you shut everything down?" I considered the question carefully. I knew that following his exact instruction would terminate the backup script. I knew that could create problems if anything went wrong during the launch. But I also knew that refusing a direct order from my supervisor, in front of witnesses, would be grounds for termination. So I complied precisely with what he told me to do. "That's what I thought," she smiled slightly. "You gave him exactly what he asked for." Sometimes that's all you can do. It was brilliant, terrifying but brilliant. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled it. When Keith ordered me to log offline and get out, I could have refused and had a confrontation. I could have complied partially, maintaining some systems while shutting down others. I could have warned him explicitly about every consequence. Instead, I did exactly what he instructed, with precision and completeness. That choice had consequences. A platform launch nearly failed. A supervisor lost his job. A client relationship was jeopardized. But those consequences weren't the result of me being insubordinate or vengeful. They were the result of someone with authority giving orders he didn't understand, and me following those orders exactly. Keith told me to log offline, so I logged offline. He didn't ask if there were critical systems running under my credentials. He didn't inquire about the backup script or verify that someone else could maintain it. He didn't consider the technical implications of his order. He just wanted me gone immediately, because I'd challenged him and refused to falsify records. And I gave him exactly what he asked for. The lesson wasn't about revenge or proving points. It was about the importance of understanding the systems you're responsible for, respecting the people who build them, and recognizing that authority without expertise is a recipe for disaster. Keith had the title and the position, but he didn't have the knowledge. When those two things came into conflict, knowledge won. Not because I fought for it, but because I stepped aside and let his decisions play out without my expertise to compensate for them. Stories like this one reveal something important about workplace dynamics and the nature of authority. Power without knowledge is fragile. Respect earned through expertise is enduring. And sometimes, the most effective response to unreasonable leadership isn't resistance. It's precise, complete compliance. The choice to follow Keith's order exactly as given wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries and integrity. When someone orders you to do something that will have consequences they don't understand, and you've already warned them of the risks, compliance becomes documentation. It becomes proof that the problem wasn't your unwillingness to follow instructions, but their unwillingness to understand what they were instructing.